everyone, Hannah here. Let's break down downward facing dog. So a couple of things you might want to think about is the positioning of your hands to begin with. So if I do this just facing on frontwards towards you guys, you want to think about spreading out your fingers once you place them into the ground. So I try to widen my fingers around the middle finger. I also attempt to not turn my fingers too far out or rotate them too far in. So depending a little bit on your bone structure, you want to aim to sort of point middle finger straight forwards if you can. Now the positioning of the hands in terms of the width is also quite important. You want to be placing your hands into downward facing dog the same position that you would have them in a high plank pose, the same position you'd have them in a chaturanga shape. So the most common thing that I see is people have hands way too close in downward facing dog, in high plank, in chaturanga. Always, that's usually what I see. So you want to really think about the positioning of the width of your hands. Don't go too crazy wide now, just think, okay, roughly shoulder width. I probably go a little bit wider than my shoulders. With regards to your feet, you're going to place those probably just a little bit narrower than your hands. All right, so a great way to actually check the distance between hands and feet for downward dog is starting in a plank pose. So I'm going to head into a plank just so you can sort of see that transition of then when I lift into downward dog. I plant my hands just slightly wider than shoulder width. Middle finger shoots straight forwards. I spread the fingers out wide around that middle finger and press lightly into the pad of the fingertips and the knuckles. So from here, I've got my heels roughly on top of those toes and then straight up and back, downward facing dog. So sometimes I see a lot of people sort of do a big old shuffle of the feet forwards. And again, it does depend a little bit on the biology of your bone structure, length of limbs. So it could be that you do need to do a little bit of a tuck in of the feet compared to the hands. But on the whole, that's a really great measurement, hands and feet distance. So if I ripple forwards through to plank again, you can see that I didn't need to change too much there. Ripple back into downward dog. Now, you might notice I'm not the most beautiful model when it comes to my arms in downward facing dog. I've got these wonderfully wonky arms. This is me with straight arms. It's just the bone structure of them. I look hyper flexible from the angle that you're looking at, but it's just that I've got this sort of almost L shape in my straight arms. I've chosen to add a little bit of a bend into the knees, and you might want to do that too. It gives you a bit more space for the hamstrings. What I'm trying to avoid doing is lifting the gaze, looking forwards, and then starting to tilt the pelvis, sticking the bum up and sort of collapsing through the belly and the ribs. I want to stay looking back towards the toes. Find length through the sideways. So as I'm talking, it's a little bit tricky here to show, but I'm trying to bring the lower ribs just slightly in. Find a little Uddiyana Bandha abdominal lock, lower belly, just finding a sense of drawing in very lightly. If it's possible for you to bring the heels to the earth, just note that that doesn't then change the shape. So really, it is not important to have heels to the earth. So adding that little bend into the knees could be a really fabulous way of you getting your downward facing dog. See if you can find a sense of broadening through the chest, so we're not kind of sinking into the shoulders in this way. You want to see if you can press out from the earth, lift the sit bones to the sky. So again, we're trying to avoid this tilting, this rounding. This is often what I tend to see. I want to see if I can create a V shape, sit bones to the sky, hip bones a little closer to the thighs. When you're ready to come out, maybe you want to soften down into a child's pose. Thanks for joining me today. In another post, I'll give you some alternatives to downward facing dog. Downward facing dog is one of those poses that does come up time and time again in a Vinyasa flow style class. So if you're finding that it isn't an active resting pose, which it is often labeled as once you find your groove in your yoga practice, then we can work with some alternatives to help you find a little bit of peace in your flow Vinyasa practice.